Stay away. You're just stress, my dad said. I answered, okay. Days later he texted, can you send $5,000 fast? I wrote back, thought you were better without me. Calls started right away. But then my dad didn't say I was causing stress. He said I was the stress. Like I was some kind of weather system he just couldn't escape. I'm Marlene, 34 years old, Columbus, Ohio. And I have spent most of my adult life trying to be the daughter my father could be proud of. Spoiler. It didn't go the way I planned. But let me back up, because if I jump straight to the part where he asked me for $5,000 3 days after telling me to disappear, you're going to think I'm making this up. I'm not. My dad, Raymond, has always been what my late grandmother used to call complicated. The way people say he has a big personality, when what they really mean is, he's a lot and nobody wants to say it. Grandma Dot was my mom's mother, so she had zero reason to defend Raymond, and she still found the charitable word. That was her gift. Mine, apparently, was being his emotional punching bag for 3 decades before finally deciding I was done. Growing up it was just the 3 of us. Me, Raymond, and my older brother Caleb. Mom left when I was 6. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it explains why I made excuses for him for so long. Caleb eventually moved to Portland, set clean limits, called Raymond on Father's Day and his birthday, and that was enough for Caleb. Simple math. I was never good at that math. I was always the one who showed up. When Raymond had knee surgery, I took 2 weeks off work to drive him to appointments. When his landlord tried hiking his rent, I spent a weekend going through his lease with a highlighter. When his car broke down on I-70 at 11 at night, you already know who he called. And he wasn't always mean about it. He could be warm, funny in this dry deadpan way I genuinely loved. There were Sunday afternoons watching old westerns where everything felt okay. Those afternoons kept me coming back. I think that's how it works with complicated people. Just enough sunlight to make you forget all the shade. But then there were the other times. When I bought my condo in 2021, he asked me why I'd chosen that neighborhood. When I got promoted, he said, well, it's about time, isn't it? I sat in my car outside his house and cried for 20 minutes. Did I say anything to him? Course not. I just filed it away in the very full cabinet I keep in the back of my mind. My best friend Patricia told me probably a dozen times, Marlene, you're holding a door open for someone who keeps walking through it and wiping his feet on you. I should have listened sooner. February. Brutal week at work. I called Raymond just to hear a familiar voice. Not asking for advice, not asking for anything. Just 10 minutes of conversation. He let me get about 4 minutes in. Then he said, Marlene, I'm going to be straight with you. Lately, whenever I see your name on my phone, I tense up. You bring stress everywhere you go. Maybe we both need a break from each other. I didn't speak for a few seconds. Then I said, okay. And I hung up. Do you think that was the right response? Because part of me still isn't sure. The other part thinks it was the most powerful word I'd ever said in my life. I made a quiet decision that night. No dramatic text. No calling Caleb. No long emotional letter. I was simply going to take Raymond at his word. He wanted peace without me, fine. I'd give him exactly that. What I didn't know was that it would take him exactly 71 hours to blow that peace apart himself. 71 hours. Then my phone buzzed. And what he wrote? Honestly, I wasn't even shocked. I was something else entirely. Something that had been bending for 34 years finally just straightened out. But I'll tell you what he said very soon. And I'll also tell you what I did about it, because trust me, that's the part worth waiting for. Has anyone ever made you feel like you were just too much? Drop something in the comments. I really want to know I'm not alone in this. 71 hours of silence. And honestly, they were some of the most peaceful hours I'd had in years. I cleaned my apartment, finished a book I'd been putting off for months, and actually slept without that low hum of anxiety I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Then Raymond texted, hey, things are tight right now. Can you send $5,000? Kind of urgent. No hello. No mention of what he'd said 3 days earlier. No sorry. Just money. Urgent. I read it 3 times, put my phone face down and made myself a coffee. Because I knew if I responded immediately, it wouldn't go well for either of us. Here's the thing about Raymond's finances. I only knew the details because I'd been managing them for years. Early retirement that barely covered rent, a habit of lending money to his brother Gerald who never paid it back, and what I can only describe as creative financial decisions that made sense to nobody but him. I'd bailed him out twice before. Both times he said thank you exactly once and never mentioned it again. I knew what this was. I knew what the old Marlene would have done. Called back within 10 minutes, asked 0 questions, transferred the money, because it was easier than the guilt. But I wasn't her anymore. I picked up my phone and typed, "I thought you were better without me around. Wasn't that the point?" Sent it. Went back to my coffee. Was that wrong of me? I've asked myself that 100 times. Part of me felt petty. The other part felt like I'd finally learned to speak a language I should have been fluent in years ago. His response came 11 minutes later. "That's not fair. I was having a hard day when I said that. You know how I get." There it was. You know how I get. Raymond's all-purpose eraser. Wipe out whatever he said, reset to 0, expect me to meet him there with a smile. I had accepted that phrase so many times I'd stopped noticing it. I called Patricia. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, the text, my response, his response. She paused, then said very calmly, "Marlene, do not send that man $5,000. I told her I wasn't planning to. She said, "Say it like you mean it." I laughed for the first time in days. But here's what was really eating at me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the ease of it. The ease with which Raymond had dismissed me, then reached right back through the door the moment he needed something, as if nothing had happened. And that's when it hit me. Raymond wasn't just careless. He had learned over many years that I would always come back. I was reliable the way a safety net is reliable. Always there, never thanked, never thought about until you're falling. Have you ever realized someone has been counting on your patience as a strategy? Because that realization sat with me all night. I didn't respond. The next morning I had 4 missed calls and a voicemail. I almost skipped it. But I listened, and Raymond sounded different. Not apologetic exactly, but something underneath his words had shifted. He sounded, for the first time in a long time, a little lost. And I'll be honest, got to me. 'Cause he's still my dad. That doesn't just evaporate. But feeling something and acting on it are 2 completely different things. And I was just starting to learn that difference. What I decided to do next wasn't necessarily smart. But it was honest. And it set off a chain of events I absolutely did not see coming. For either of us. Have you ever been someone's safety net, the person they only think about when they're falling? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know I'm not alone. I decided to call him back. No. I know what you're thinking. But hear me out, because I didn't call him back to help. I called him back to finally have the conversation we should have had years ago. He picked up on the first ring. "Marlene." Just my name. The way he said it told me everything. Relieved, a little sheepish, already preparing his case. "Raymond." I used his first name deliberately. I'd never done that before. There was a short silence on his end that told me he noticed. I didn't ask about the money. I asked him something else entirely. "Do you actually think I bring stress into your life? Or was that just something convenient to say that day?" Another silence. Longer this time. "It came out wrong," he said. "That's not what I asked you." I could hear him shifting around, doing that thing he does when he's uncomfortable, clicking his tongue, moving in his chair. Then he said, "You push back on everything, Marlene. You always have. It's exhausting sometimes." And honestly, I almost laughed. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. I do push back. Ask questions. I don't just nod and agree. And apparently for Raymond that had always been the problem. I said, "So what you want is a daughter who just goes along with everything and shows up with her checkbook. Is that right?" He didn't answer. Which was, in its own way, an answer. I told him I wasn't sending the money. I told him calmly, without drama. The way you'd cancel a subscription you'd been meaning to cancel for years. I also told him that I loved him because I did, and that I wasn't going anywhere, but that things were going to be different going forward. He did not take that well. The call ended with him saying I was being dramatic and that he'd figure it out himself. Fine. I said okay, my new favorite word, and hung up. Now here's where my cousin Deb enters the story. Deb is Raymond's niece from his side. The one family member on that entire side who has always been straightforwardly decent to me. She called me 2 days later, which told me Raymond had been talking. "He called my mom crying," she said. "Said you abandoned him." I abandoned him. I want you to sit with that for a second. The man who told me I was stressed, who asked for $5,000 without so much as an apology, was telling people I had abandoned him. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Because I feel like this is a very specific kind of storytelling that some people are very good at. Deb, to her absolute credit, was not buying it. She'd watched Raymond operate for years. She told me, "I just wanted you to know what's being said. You don't owe anyone an explanation." I appreciated that more than she knows. But here's where I'll admit I made a mistake. Because instead of sitting tight and letting things play out, I got impatient. I decided to do something that felt satisfying in the moment and was probably, objectively, not my finest hour. I sent Raymond a budget. An actual document. Line by line. His monthly income, his known expenses, where the gaps were, what adjustments he could make, and a note at the bottom that said, "You don't need my money, Raymond. You need a plan." Here's one. Did I think he would receive that well? No. Did I send it anyway? Absolutely. Patricia, when I told her, went quiet for a full 5 seconds and then said, "Marlene, you are so your father's daughter." And I hate to say it, she might be right. Raymond didn't respond to the document for 4 days. And during those 4 days, I genuinely started to wonder whether I'd pushed too far. Whether I'd been so focused on standing my ground that I'd turned it into a point I was trying to win rather than a relationship I was trying to fix. That thought kept me humble. Little. Because something else was happening in the background that I didn't know about yet. Something that Deb would eventually tell me. And when she did, it changed how I saw the whole situation. I'll get to that very soon. And let me just say, I was not the only one having a hard month. Okay, I need to ask, was sending that budget completely unhinged, or was it actually reasonable? I genuinely cannot decide. Tell me what you think. Deb called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could tell immediately by her voice that this wasn't a casual check-in. "So," she said, "did you know Raymond has been having some health issues?" I did not know that. Apparently he'd been dealing with high blood pressure for months. His doctor had flagged it seriously back in the fall, told him to reduce stress, change his diet, slow down. Raymond, being Raymond, had told nobody. Not me, not Caleb, not anyone. Just quietly carried it and then apparently decided that the stress in question was me. I sat with that for a while. I want to be clear, I'm not saying his health issues excused what he said. They didn't. But they added a layer to the picture I hadn't been seeing. Raymond wasn't just difficult. He was scared. And scared Raymond, I was learning, didn't reach out and say I'm scared. He pushed people away and called it self-preservation. Does that make it okay? Well, did it make me feel about 12 different things at once? Absolutely. I called Caleb. Now, Caleb and I love each other, but we have very different approaches to Raymond. Caleb's strategy, as I mentioned, was clean distance. Mine had always been messy closeness. When I told him everything, the stress comment, the money request, the budget document I sent, the health news, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marlene, why didn't you just ignore the text?" And I said, "Because I'm not you, Caleb." He said, "Yeah, I'm aware." And somehow it wasn't mean when he said it. It was almost fond. Caleb agreed to call Raymond. Not to fix anything, just to check in, brother to father, without any of the loaded history that came attached to my name apparently. I appreciated that. I also told him about the budget document, and he laughed for a solid 30 seconds, which I'm choosing to take as a compliment. Meanwhile, Raymond had finally responded to said budget document. One line. "I didn't raise you to talk to me like an accountant." I stared at that for a while. Then I typed back, "You didn't raise me to be your safety net either. Here we are." Sent it. Felt immediately like I was 17 again, which was not entirely a comfortable feeling. But here's what happened next that I did not expect. 3 days after that exchange, Raymond called. Not texted, called, and when I answered, he didn't lead with defense. He didn't mention the money or the budget or any of it. He just said, "Caleb told me you've been going through it at work too." "I'm okay," I said automatically, "the way you do." I didn't ask if you were okay. I asked how you were doing. And that small, clumsy distinction, broke something open a little. Because Raymond had never in my memory made that particular effort before. Asking how I was doing rather than accepting I'm fine and moving on. It was small. But from him it was enormous. We talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't a perfect conversation. He didn't apologize cleanly. Raymond doesn't do clean apologies, he sort of circles the thing and hopes you understand what he means. But he circled it. And I understood. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd been looking into some part-time bookkeeping work to close his budget gap. He said it casually like it was nothing. But I knew what it cost him to say it, because Raymond's pride about money was ironclad. I didn't make a big deal of it. I just said, "That sounds like a solid idea." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. I wasn't ready to call everything fixed. I wasn't even close to that. There were years of patterns between us that one phone call couldn't touch. But something had moved. Something small and stubborn had shifted, and I was honest enough with myself to feel it. Deb texted me that night. "Heard you and your dad talked. How'd it go?" I wrote back. "Ask me again in 6 months." She sent a laughing emoji. Then, for what it's worth, he showed my mom your budget document. She said it was the most organized thing she'd ever seen from anyone in this family. I laughed out loud at that. Alone in my apartment, genuinely laughing. And then I thought, okay, maybe I am a little bit his daughter after all. Stubborn, complicated, and occasionally sending unsolicited financial documents to people who need to hear the truth. There are worse things to be. But I want you to know, what came next in the weeks that followed was something I hadn't let myself hope for. And it started with something Raymond did entirely on his own, without me asking. I'll tell you what it was. And I think honestly it might surprise you. That moment when he asked how I was doing, not if I was okay, but actually how I was doing, did that get to you a little? Because it got to me more than I expected. Tell me in the comments. 3 weeks later, a card arrived in my mailbox. Not a text. Not a voicemail. An actual physical card, the kind you buy at a drugstore with a generic landscape on the front. Mountains, I think, and Raymond's handwriting inside. His handwriting is terrible, always has been, and I had to read it twice to make out some of the words. But I got them. He wrote that he'd been thinking about what I said. That he knew he hadn't made things easy. That he was proud of me. And then, in parentheses, like he couldn't quite say it straight, always have been even when I didn't show it. He didn't mention the money. He didn't mention the budget document. He just said he hoped we could figure out how to do this better, him and me, because he wasn't getting any younger and he didn't want to waste whatever time was left being stupid about it. That last part. Being stupid about it. Only Raymond could make an olive branch sound like a mild complaint. Yet, I sat at my kitchen table and read that card 4 times. Then I called Grandma Dot's old number out of pure muscle memory before remembering she'd been gone for 2 years. And I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling the specific ache of wanting to tell someone something and realizing the person you most want to tell isn't there anymore. If you've ever done that, dialed someone who's gone, you know exactly what that feels like. And if you haven't, I hope you don't for a long time. Called Patricia instead. She listened to me read the whole card out loud, terrible handwriting descriptions included. When I finished, she said, "Marlene, that man just apologized in the most Raymond way possible, and I think you have to give him something back." I knew she was right. I'd known it before I called her. So I did something that was hard for me in a completely different way than any of this had been hard. I didn't write back. I drove to Raymond's apartment, 40 minutes each way, knocked on his door, and when he opened it looking like he hadn't expected me in a million years, I just said, "I got your card." He nodded. Looked at the floor briefly the way men of his generation do when emotions show up uninvited. I said, "I'm not a safety net, Raymond. But I'm your daughter. And those are different things, and I need you to understand the difference." He said, "I'm working on it." And I believed him. Not completely, not without reservation, because trust is a thing you rebuild in small increments, not all at once. But enough. I believed him enough. We had coffee. We watched 20 minutes of a Western that was already halfway through. And neither of us knew what was happening in the plot, and it didn't matter. Before I left, he mentioned the part-time bookkeeping job had come through. Just 2 days a week, but enough to close the gap he'd been stressed about. He seemed lighter saying it. Steadier. I didn't bring up the $5,000. I didn't need to. That conversation had already been had in every way that mattered. Caleb called me that night, which he almost never does unprompted. He said Raymond had called him too, separately, and said some of the same things. Caleb was quiet for a moment and then said, "You know you rattled something loose in him, right? Whatever you did." I said, "I just stopped pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." Caleb said, "Yeah, maybe I should try that sometime." Baby steps. In the months that followed, things weren't perfect. I want to be honest about that, because I don't believe in tidy endings that wrap up every loose thread. Raymond still occasionally says things that make me want to drive into a lake. He still has moments where his pride gets in the way of his sense. But he calls now without needing something. He asks how I'm doing and waits for the real answer. He sent me a photo last month of a Western he thought I'd like, completely unprompted, just because he thought of me. Sounds small. It is small. But from Raymond it's a whole language. And me. I'm different too. I stopped keeping that cabinet in the back of my mind, the one full of filed grievances I never addressed. I started saying things out loud calmly when they needed to be said. It's uncomfortable every single time. I do it anyway. Patricia says I've grown. I told her I prefer to think of it as finally reading the instructions after assembling the furniture wrong for 30 years. She did not find that as funny as I did. And the $5,000. He never asked again. And I never offered. And somewhere in that silence, we found something that worked better than either of those options. I didn't fix my father. I don't think that was ever my job. But I stopped disappearing into his version of who I was supposed to be. And when I did that, there was finally enough space for him to find his way toward who he could actually be. That's not a bad outcome for two stubborn people and one very blunt budget document. If this story resonated with you at all, even just one part of it, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if something I said didn't sit right with you, tell me that too. Can take it. If you made it all the way here, thank you. Genuinely. Means more than you know. And if you liked it, a like goes a long way. Tells me this was worth sharing. Take care of yourselves. And maybe, just maybe, make that call you've been putting off. You never know what a little honesty can shake loose.